Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Stamp Chat. I'm Heidi Rhodes. Today's guest joins us from Princeton, New Jersey. Professor Daniel Kurtz is currently an adjunct professor of history and social sciences at Middlesex County College in Edison, New Jersey. He earned his BA and master's degrees from Rutgers University, where he studied history and political science. He's been recognized for his teaching excellence through his recent nomination for Adjunct Professor of the Year. He's published articles on numerous topics, from the temperance coffee house movement of the late 1800s to journalist projects in East Africa. He currently resides in the Princeton area with his wife and son and cat. Stamp Chat is a production of the American Philatelic Society with over 28,000 members worldwide. We are the largest philatelic organization in the world. Whether you're a seasoned or novice collector, we have the resources to meet your needs. Membership's benefits include a monthly subscription to the American Philatelist, access to the APRL, discounts on expertising services, and of course, so much more. Visit stamps.org to find out more about becoming a member. It's easy, it's fast, and you'll become part of 134 years of fellowship in the hobby like that. Now, before we begin, friends, just a few housekeeping items to take care of. This is a webinar, and as such, your cameras are turned off and your mics are muted respectively throughout the presentation. However, don't fear, please use the chat box as liberally as you like to talk among each other, and I'll be moderating the chat box as well. If you have a question for Professor Kurtz, then please use the Q&A box. And friends on YouTube, go ahead and use the comment box below the video to ask your question or chime in. We do watch our videos. And again, this is being recorded and it will be up on the APS YouTube channel. And with that, Professor Kurtz, take it away with victory stamps from the Hong Kong Postal Service. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Heidi, thank you so much for having everybody on here. I want to say hi to all my friends out there. Hi, Michelle. Okay. I always talk with her. Okay, anyway, it's good to see everybody. And of course, 2020 has been a pretty tough year. But it's been a pretty tough year for Hong Kong too, obviously. So what I wanted to do today is I really wanted to talk about, you know, as a historian and a writer and a collector, you know, you could always say that there's always, like, you know, your favorite stamp, or maybe like you have a different favorite stamp depending on, you know, you have a favorite canceled stamp, and then maybe you have a favorite stamp that features an artwork or something along those lines. And from my point of view, my favorite stamp, and the stamp that really I find myself, you know, looking at a lot and thinking about it and what it means, is actually a series. It's actually a series of stamps. It's called the Hong Kong Victory, or the Hong Kong Phoenix stamps of 1945 and 46. And I have them right here. Okay, here it is. I was gonna share my screen, but I'm kind of afraid that I'm gonna have like this huge delay. So you know, let me share my screen. Actually, let me try this. Share screen. Okay, desktop. Oh, share. Okay, there it is.
I got you back, Daniel. There you go.
Right. Okay, you're now screen sharing. Okay. This is the stamp, ladies and gentlemen, that I'm talking about today, or one of them. Okay. And again, this is called the Hong Kong Victory stamp, and it's a stamp that launches 1,000 stories. You know, I'm one of those people who just, you know, I'm kind of a crazy stamp guy. Well, you know, stamps are like alive, you know, like as soon as you like take a stamp and like you put it on an envelope and you send it into its system, you know, it's going on its own journey. You know, it's going to have lots of stories to tell. It's just the job of the stamp collector, the philatelist, to kind of translate that story or interpret it. Okay. Anyway, maybe I'm getting a little too carried away. Okay, so when you take a look at this stamp has an amazing story. First of all, this stamp comes in two denominations. It comes in a Hong Kong 30-cent denomination, and it comes in a denomination of $1 Hong Kong dollar, I believe. Yes, one Hong Kong dollar. And it was, it had an orange tint to it. Okay. The printing of the stamp was very high quality. It was printed in banknote fashion, in the sense that to a modern day person, they'd think, oh, wow, it's just like money. It has like raised text and that kind of thing. And, it's multicolored, and it doesn't look like it was printed on a laser printer. It looks like something of, genuine value, kind of like, stamps when I was a kid. You would go and get stamps, and obviously the image would just jump out at you. Okay, let me just stop screen sharing for a minute if I can. Oh, here it is. Okay, sorry about that. Here's the setting. No, that's not it. Hold on. I'm sorry, Heidi. Just give me a second here. All right.
Okay.
Yeah. Back to meeting. Is that it?
I think there's a up on the top of your screen.
Stop share. Right. Thank you, Heidi.
No problem.
Thank you very much. I apologize.
No,
okay.
Please.
Okay. Anyway. All right. So everyone should have their screen back. The screen should look normal again. But anyway. So it's a very, very interesting story. Now, basically, first of all, let's talk about the stamp in and of itself. Let's talk about the stamp before we talk about the exact history of it. Okay. The stamp was actually designed in a prisoner of war camp. It was designed in the early 1940s. The British and most of the Europeans that were captured when the Japanese, of course, captured Hong Kong in December of 1941, are put in internment camps. And these internment camps were, at best, they could just be places of incredible, endless, isolating boredom and neglect. Okay. I mean, the best thing that you could hope for from your Japanese captors is that they leave you alone. Okay. But of course, we also know that they could be exceptionally brutal places of sadistic abuse. And the prospect of sadistic abuse happening at any time was real. And if you got sick, there was no one who was going to help you. You were finished. Okay. Technically, there might have been communication with the outside world through the Red Cross. I believe the Red Cross, the International Red Cross facilitated that, but it never really worked properly, and letters didn't really circulate that often. So you were basically left with who you had. So in this prisoner of war camp in Hong Kong, there are these two British men. There's, and it's weird because they have similar names, so I have to look at my notes. You have Edward Wynne Jones, who was the former postmaster of Hong Kong, British postmaster. And you have a friend of his, W.E. Jones, who was a civil servant. And W.E. Jones was like this kind of guy who was like into heraldry, and he had designed stamps before. And he was just like an incessant doodler. He was just constantly doodling, right? So midway through their imprisonment, they wanted to do something that made them feel optimistic. So the two Joneses are not related. What they did is they designed a stamp that would be used in a time of victory. So, they had no idea when it was going to end, and they, designed the stamp, I think with crayons on like the equivalent of a napkin or toilet paper or something like that. And it was, it was really elaborate. It was exceptionally elaborate. And as you just saw the stamp. In fact, let me go and get the screen share again here. Okay. And let's talk about this stamp here. Okay. Everybody can see it. All right. Okay. So if you see the stamp, obviously in the middle of the stamp, you have the British king. Right, you have the who I believe this is Queen Elizabeth's father. The modern day Queen Elizabeth. That's her father. And then what you have is all this Chinese writing around, and the Chinese writing basically is an attestation to British and Chinese friendship, so to speak. The crown, of course, represents British sovereignty. Okay, so the crown is British sovereignty. Like, let there be no doubt about that. Whatever constitutional arrangement is going on, the crown is sovereign. This is the king's land. Okay. And again, you see the phoenix, which is the traditional idea of, a city or a place or a person arising from hopeless destruction. And you have the years of the war at the bottom, 1941 to 1945. Now, there's a lot of controversy about that, about Hong Kong after the war, and we'll talk about that. Basically, what happens is that they're really pleased with the design. Okay. Not only that, but also the design is filled with some Chinese symbolism. If you could see to the left and right of the king's head, there are bats, right? They look like kind of like architectural elements, but they're not. They're bats, and that's because they're a sign of good luck in Chinese culture, at least at this time. I don't know how many people are feeling about bats anymore, but you understand my point. And as you can see, it really looks like this, really impressive document and really just a statement of the return of British rule. Okay, I'm going to stop share now. Okay, all right, very good. Okay, and again, there's a 30-cent, and that 30-cent value is for domestic consumption, meaning only mailing within Hong Kong. And then the $1 is for mailing outside of Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is very, very small at this time. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about a couple of the things that, a couple of the stories that this stamp helps to tell, okay? The first thing that's really important about it is why did the British walk back into Hong Kong? Like, why was that okay? Why was that permitted by the victorious powers? Franklin Roosevelt, before he died, made it pretty clear to Winston Churchill that, of course, the United States would be arm in arm in fighting against the Nazis, against Great Britain. And there's no doubt that America would do whatever it could to stop an invasion of Britain. That wasn't even the question. But the United States was absolutely not going to perpetually secure the British Empire. It was not going to do that. Now, of course, Roosevelt dies, and he's succeeded by Harry Truman. But there was quite a lot of people in the East and the West that were upset when the British just marched into Hong Kong and said, okay, well, we're back and we're here forever. Okay. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, wasn't there a lease until 1997? And the answer is sort of. The lease only covers the northern area of Hong Kong, an area called the New Territories. But Hong Kong itself was ceded by China in 1841 in perpetuity, forever. It was British land, okay? It was British land. It was ceded forever, okay? So there were a lot of people, particularly on the left wing, but also in the United States who, maybe they could understand the logistics of the British coming in and trying to get order going and whatever. But China was an ally, nationalist China was an ally in World War II, and it had lost tens of millions of people. And the Chinese had fought valiantly against the Japanese wherever they could. And the British were almost totally absent from the Pacific War until until the end of the war. Britain, the United States really was taking care of most of the very, very heavy weight of fighting in China against the Japanese, aside from the Chinese. A lot of people don't know that America even had bases. The United States had bases in Western China. The United States had army bases, right? And the United States had bombed Japanese Hong Kong. It had bombed Japanese Hong Kong. So there was that whole idea, like, well, why are they back? What's going on? So that was, one thing that was, pretty controversial. The second thing that was controversial is that you can't think of Hong Kong in 1945 and 46 like you would think of Hong Kong in 1975 and 76. You can't think of it that way. Hong Kong at this time in history, after World War II, is not barely hanging on to the periphery of China for its dear life, okay? It's not like that at all, because Communist China and Communist China's victory was still years away. The communists are not going to take over China until 1949, okay? In 1945, when the war ends, no reasonable person in the West would have properly predicted that the People's Republic of China was going to exist within a few years. I mean, the communists were certainly a military power on the Chinese mainland. No one denied that, and that they had served against the Japanese with courage and with effectiveness. That too. But the idea that the Chinese were somehow the communists were going to overwhelm the Chinese mainland, it just like, it really wasn't something to be, believed by a lot of people. There were some people who were prophetic, but not many. So basically, this is a colony that is very much connected to the Chinese mainland, very, very much connected. Okay, Hong Kong was established by the British as an entreport. And there were a lot of European colonies at this time that served the same purpose that still existed. Okay, that existed basically as business bases where you would go, if you were British, you would go to Hong Kong and you would get all the security and protection of the British government, and you'd be able to do all of your business in Hong Kong and like safely retreat back and that kind of thing. The idea of developing some kind of, freedom zone or, I don't know, enlightened area, it just wasn't the case yet. That wasn't going to happen. Okay. Now, there were people who did probably feel like they were on the periphery of things, and that's probably like the British who did live in China. Okay. I mean, of course, obviously, but the Chinese that lived in China, even though, there was a lot of turmoil on the Chinese mainland, they were connected. You could travel back and forth. The border wasn't sealed. Okay, and people constantly did travel back and forth, especially in the first few years after the war, when the communists and the war and the Chinese Civil War is not raging anywhere near Hong Kong at that time. So that's very important. That's important to note. The third thing that's important to note is that the British were very, very serious when it came to Hong Kong about the concept of imperial rule. Generally speaking, the British belief in self-government, in colonial self-government, in the development of deliberative, responsible institutions, generally only applied to its white colonies. Now, there were some exceptions, okay? Because by the end of the war, you have British possessions, especially British India, where you have the Indian, you have the Indian National Congress, and you have the Muslim League. And but the British didn't really wince at this because they were dominated by an overwhelming majority of British educated, British educated, natives, Indians, basically. So, so the British did not establish a democracy. When the British returned to Hong Kong, this kind of image that the British came in and everybody suddenly had a Bill of Rights, and then suddenly there's all these magnificent elections, and all of these hundreds of thousands of Chinese subjects are suddenly converted into empowered citizens. It didn't happen. It just didn't happen. Basically, the best way to describe Hong Kong in the 1940s and before is that it's basically like a Dickensian nightmare. Okay, so if you were Chinese and you settled in Hong Kong because you wanted to be a refugee from the conflicts in China or whatnot, the British generally would probably leave you alone, but you would have to deal with all kinds of elements of organized crime. Okay. So that's getting to the fourth thing about the thing that I really love about the stamp, and that the fact is that the stamp is prophetic without knowing that it's going to be prophetic. Okay. And that is, of course, we know that, within 3 decades or 2 decades, really, Hong Kong is going to become one of the world's greatest, most cosmopolitan cities. I mean, hands down, it's going to be an absolutely amazing, astounding place of disturbing and beautiful beauty. Okay. It's going to be a cosmopolitan mix of dozens of different cultures and languages, and a center to the entertainment industry, a center of the arts. But in 1946, it was not like that at all, because that city exists. The city that I was talking about existed, but that was Shanghai. Shanghai, only when Shanghai falls in 1949, do we have a situation where all of that cultural capital, and of course all of that financial capital, pours into Hong Kong, and then the border is generally sealed. I mean, the border would remain somewhat porous, but by the time the Korean War breaks out in 1950, where you have Americans shooting at at Chinese Chinese soldiers on the Korean Peninsula, that's the situation changes. It definitely changes. Okay, so what you see is basically a huge sea change as far as life in the cosmopolitan center. Hong Kong in 1946 is a kind of overcrowded backwater entrepreneur entry area of the British Empire. It's like Singapore, in that respect. It's like Portuguese Goa in India. It's a place where the British really just want to live well, take advantage of cheap labor, and do business with a country that they're interested in largely exploiting. Okay. And of course, that's going to change. And that changes dramatically because it has to. Okay. Because it has to change. Now, let's talk about 1949. Let's talk about 1949 and 1950. Okay. 1949 and 1950 come around, and Hong Kong suddenly emerges to deep strategic prominence to the United States in the Cold War. Okay, so Hong Kong is now looked at as kind of like a beacon of freedom, sitting there glittering, off the, clinging on to China as kind of like this, this breath of fresh freedom and freedom air, just miles away from this, this red menace of almost incalculable proportions, that kind of thing. And what happens is that, of course, the United States, to my knowledge, never publicly guarantees the territorial integrity of Hong Kong. But I do believe, pretty sure, I'm not an expert on this, that the United States basically said to the British, yeah, I mean, obviously a direct attack on Hong Kong will be considered a direct attack on American interests. So it didn't matter because Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party were not going to invade it. They were not going to do that. They were not going to invade Hong Kong. They were not looking for a fast and direct clash with the Western powers. They were not interested in that. So what happens, of course, is that the British go from kind of an exploitive class, exploitive Dickensian class, and then in the 1950s and 60s, a lot of, because of, modern communications technology and advances and expectations of human rights and things like that are going on all over the world. If the British want to stay, they're going to have to start acting like a modern administration. That's what they're going to have to do. So they do react in that way. They appoint a large English-speaking civil service. They create vehicles of anti-corruption mechanisms within the colonial government. There are limited elections, very limited elections. The British are still firmly in control, but there are kind of like limited. Okay, there is a legislative council. It's not remotely democratic, but there are certain kind of almost like Republican mechanisms within it. So it kind of like looks like a lawmaking body. It talks like a lawmaking body. You can go and see it and whatnot, but it wasn't like the New York City Council or anything like that. It was still responsible ultimately to London. Okay. So, and of course the British begin to develop the infrastructure. They build a highway system. They build the cross harbor tunnels because of course Hong Kong is an archipelago like New York City. It's a group of different islands. And of course, it becomes it does become this kind of peripheral cosmopolitan hub that's hanging on the edge of China. And then that becomes more extreme. That actually becomes more extreme as the Chinese Communist Party goes berserk. Okay. Now this is getting into Chinese Communist Party history, but we have this image that the Chinese Communist Party was like, it was like Stalin, 24/7. And it wasn't. It had a very, very complex history within China, and its brutality waxed and waned. Okay, I mean, it was always there once victory came in 1949, but it waxes and wanes. Okay, and what happens is that as Hong Kong is moving to its commercial height and its height in fame and identity, okay, China is entering into the Cultural Revolution of the late 1960s, which is going to rage really almost until 1980. Okay, and the feeling of isolation at that point, the feeling that China is going in a completely different direction. This is like two different planets. That thought really takes over at that time, and that there would never be any reunification. I mean, you could ask people back then and say, well, isn't most of Hong Kong going back in 1997? They would have been like, yeah, that's never going to happen. It was that kind of thought. In fact, by the late 1960s, it was very frequent for not just visitors, but Chinese refugees who had successfully made lives in Hong Kong to go to the border, there's a small land border between Hong Kong and China. Most of it is water-based. And you could look over the border, just like Americans would go to West Berlin and look over the wall, and you'd be able to see the world that communism had made, right? And you would see, I mean, I've read descriptions of it. You saw, men with machine guns and people like, digging mud and things like that today where Shenzhen is, right? And it was obvious that it was a pretty miserable existence. And, this is the time when people in Hong Kong, I would say between 1965 and 1985, right? That 20 years is when the Hong Kong identity that today is causing so much disruption, right, really formulates, where you have a deep and abiding physical and communications embargo between Hong Kong and the mainland, okay? And that's a whole other part of postal history that I'm fascinated with, and that's the idea of postal embargoes. The idea of like what happens when people just can't contact each other at all. That's of course, this is something that is a frequent theme all throughout the Cold War, depending on, whether you're talking about East Germany or North and South Vietnam or North and South Korea or Hong Kong and China or Taiwan and China, this idea where you have these postal embargoes. Now, I want to say something too before I take any questions about postal relations between Hong Kong and China after World War II. And that is that there were times that it was possible to mail a letter from Hong Kong to China. You could do it. But once the Cultural Revolution starts to really get out of control, it was very dangerous for anybody in China, aside from like a governmental official who's in some kind of official communications, to receive a letter from like a relative who had fled to China. It would immediately make you suspect in your town. So you actually might get a letter. You might. They might say, oh, here's a letter. You got it from, Aunt so-and-so that left for Hong Kong 10 years ago. But of course, the government would have read the letter and maybe copied it and whatnot and filed a copy away. And, it really made you a target. It made you, it demonstrated a degree of disloyalty, I guess you could say. Now, of course, this changes after 1980, because after 1980, Deng Xiaoping becomes supreme leader of China, and he's dedicated to a genuine but limited opening of China to the world. So then things, really start to change at that point after 1980. So getting back to the stamp, and here it is, right? Okay. Oh, by the way, friends, I'm sorry. Here's the $1 stamp. This is the stamp for international, which in Hong Kong, almost every letter is international, except like your bills. But anyway, it's just getting back to the stamp. The stamp is fascinating to me because it was almost like it would have seemed extremely unlikely and almost hilariously overstated to make a stamp about a relatively unimportant colony whose legitimacy was at best debatable, after World War II. And whether or not Hong Kong was going to be able to endure without a Cold War was going to be pretty unlikely as a British colony. Maybe, I don't know, okay? But it didn't happen, okay? And what did happen is that Hong Kong became, one of the foremost cities in the world and in Asia. And I've been there. And Hong Kong is one of those locales that it doesn't disappoint. I mean, it doesn't disappoint, I mean, many of us have been on trips before and we get to wherever we're going. And a lot of times the reaction is, this is it. This is what everybody's talking about, but Hong Kong, at least for me, it didn't provoke that reaction. I was awed. I was awed by what I saw. I was awed by the level of connectivity, by the intensity of the infrastructure, by the different ways of getting around. I was just so absolutely impressed with the different types of architecture and the fact that the Hong Kongers waste no time in letting an American know that they believe that they're distinctly Hong Kongers. They're most of them will say, of course we're Chinese, we're Chinese people, but they're like, but we have completely different outlook than many of the people on the mainland. And of course, this is why Hong Kong over the past 2 years has been thrown into incredible moments of violence and riots and mass marches and that kind of thing. So it's real, this kind of identity that Hong Kongers have. Excuse me. And there's one more thing I want to say, Heidi, before I take questions, and that is the role of Hong Kong heraldry. So heraldry, because it's so British, is something that Hong Kongers still, in a lot of ways, cherish. Okay, so what you see is this flag is the Hong Kong colonial flag. Looks like the Australian flag, and this flag was supposed to be retired. It was supposed to be retired after 1997. And it was actually one of the most common flags that Hong Kongers used, along with the American flag, during their recent waves of demonstration. And they debate about what it means. Does it mean that they want to become a British territory again? I mean, I don't know how realistic that is. Does it mean they want to become an independent country like Singapore? Some of them, debate that. Others say, no. What we want to do is we just want to remain completely autonomous. We want to be part of China. And we are part of China, but we want to be completely self-ruling with our own unique way, of life. So this conversation is ongoing in Hong Kong. It really is ongoing, and now it's illegal, okay, which is a new thing. The Chinese government has extended its sedition law to Hong Kong itself, which means, well, it means whatever the Chinese government says it means. So if you question Chinese governmental authority, if you believe in an independent Hong Kong, if you believe that Hong Kong should be retroceded to Britain, again, kind of a strange belief, but there are a few people who think that. I don't think I've ever heard of people wanting to be recolonized, but I don't know. But it's it's a huge threat to the Communist Party in Beijing. Okay, to the Communist Party of Beijing. Okay, and that's my presentation. Hooray! Yay, Hong Kong. Sorry. Okay, I'll take questions if anybody has.
Yeah. Hold on one sec. Let me.
Okay, no problem.
Right there.
Hey, I'm sorry if I spoke too fast.
You have a very unique style, Daniel, that everybody, and you don't need to apologize for anything.
It's the coffee.
You do.
The iced coffee.
That coffee is your thing. Friends, I just received a nice message, and I know that this really won't translate well to our YouTube presenters or watchers, but look in the chat box, friends. Mauricio Mejia, he's been a Stamp Chat presenter. He's coming to us from Tegucigalpa in Honduras.
Whoa, that's so cool.
Yeah, so there's your mask, or in the mask, so that's pretty cool.
Very cool.
All right, so thanks so much, Daniel. Let's get the party started, as if it's not already party. We just started with you. We've got some questions. What are the animals on the right and left of the king's head? Lions, tigers, bears? Oh my.
Right, there are three animals that I can identify. They are the bats. Those are actual bats that are on the periphery of the king's head. It's the King of England. That's Elizabeth II's father. Okay. There's lions, which of course are the traditional symbol of the British Empire, you know, lions. And then of course there's the phoenix, which is the mythical animal that rises from the flames to be reborn and even emboldened and strengthened. Okay. So there's lots of animal and heraldry and that kind of stuff. And this is something that, again, Hong Kongers, even today, they really love heraldry. They do. It's like they think it's so cool. Maybe because it's something that like is not really something that the communists embrace. I don't know. I'm just, you know, but they really do love it. They do. It's everywhere in Hong Kong. You go and there's heraldry, different seals and whatnot everywhere, even today. Excuse me.
When were you last there, Daniel?
A few years ago.
Okay.
2 or 3 years ago. And it was astounding to see because Hong Kong is in the Anglosphere, you know, and that's something that really takes you by surprise, right? You're in China, you know, and yeah, you know, people speak Chinese there, it's true. But you know, it is firmly within the Anglosphere. Everybody speaks English, and you know, and people come right up to you and they're like, hello, how are you? And whatnot. And they, you know, it's a very interesting cosmopolitan place. It's a very special place. I'm not saying that the circumstances of its settlement or the British being there are ideal or even noble, but the product that all these people made is like is extremely exceptional and impressive, even today. The story is not over yet. The story's not over yet. For Hong Kong, it's not. Just because things have calmed down, it doesn't mean anything. Things have calmed down because of coronavirus. People are scared to go out and they're scared to go to jail, you know. But these things are going to change, or they could change once the virus is seriously disrupted, or if the virus is destroyed. Hopefully it will be, but yeah.
Well, and that leads us to our next question. How do you predict stamps of Hong Kong changing, imagery or other aspects, as the politics and leadership of Hong Kong change over time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is a lot of that is going to have to do with whether or not the People's Republic of China can maintain its territorial integrity over the next 20 years. Okay. What I'm trying to say is this. If the Communist Party ever fell from power, right? And we don't know when that's going to happen. We don't. Just like we didn't know with the Soviet Union. You know, the Soviet Union was this giant red splotch all the way up to 1991. If you would have told me in 1990, if you would have said, you know, in a year, the Soviet Union will be gone, I'd be like, hey, really? That's crazy, you know? But now it's not so crazy because the Communist Party is the only political force that's holding that big red splotch together. That big red splotch is actually more or less a few different, you know, maybe nationalities that are very serious that would not want to be part of China. And Tibet is one of them, of course. Zhejiang, the Uyghurs, Zhejiang, I think I'm saying it, in the northwestern part is another one. And of course, Hong Kong. So, you know, you could see a situation where the Chinese communist government really is looking to obliterate Hong Kong's identity, and, you know, and Hong Kong becoming like any other mainland Chinese city, which is just like kind of like a whole home, you know, kind of place. Or you could see just the opposite. And you could see a situation where if the Communist Party dissolves, you know, splits, fails, or something along those lines, you could see a situation where, you know, I don't know what would happen with Hong Kong. I have no idea. I have no idea. And it's scary and exciting at the same time. Okay. Because right now, and I know I'm getting a little bit off the topic, China is becoming a true dictatorship. Okay. President Xi is not just like, he wants to become like the next Mao. You know, he wants to rule China for the rest of his life. And, you know, to a lot of people in America, of course, but a lot of people in China don't agree with that. They're just scared right now. So I don't know what's going to happen. So, you know, we'll see where stamp design goes. We'll see where it goes. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure.
Right. Dr. Richard Morrow, who's the philatelic librarian or the curator at the British Library, is very much on the pulse of China and Hong Kong in particular. So that would be an interesting conversation to have the both of you on for sure. Our friend Mauricio Mejia from Honduras sent us a question. Since both stamps are printed in 2 colors, are there any errors with inverts?
Good, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, there were, I believe there were errors. And I'm not an expert in that field, but yeah. And actually, there was a really bad error that was prevented at the last minute because there was a problem with the Chinese writing, and a Chinese person identified it right before it went to print. But yeah, there were mistakes made. Yes, there are very valuable versions, and they're also fakes. They're also fakes because it's such a pretty stamp. There's fakes out there for it. But it's not an expensive stamp as long as it's not flawed, as long as it's not one of the rare flawed stamps. So, you could get it for you could get the series, and it's genuine, for like maybe $8 or $9. You could. I was actually going to go and get another pair and then mail it as part of a letter to my friend as a joke, and actually have it canceled, along with, American postage. So, but they're beautiful. They really are. They're very, very beautiful stamps because, they're banknote style.
That is their banknote style. They're absolutely, right. Yes, they're very beautiful. What should we know about what recommendations, or what should we know and what recommendations do you have for us if we wish to collect the stamps of Hong Kong?
All right, that's a really good question. Okay. The first thing I would say when you're dealing with stamps of Hong Kong, of course, is buyer beware, right? We live in the age of the color quality laser printer, and the color quality laser printer can be pretty convincing, So of course, as usual, always try to buy from a respected, collector or source. And that's what I would recommend is really, you should be concerned. You need to find a way, at least to the best of your ability, to verify that the stamps are genuine. But it's not the kind of thing where you're going to spend $9,000 and go, oh my God, it's a fake. No. But the British had a lot of really impressive stamp issues, and they had a lot of crappy stamp issues in the late 60s and 70s, like stamps that look fake but are not. So yeah, that's what I would say. Also, one more thing, I think you can buy directly from Hong Kong Post. I think you can from the United States, but I'm not sure. But I think you can. I know you can from Royal Mail. But anyway, go ahead. Cool.
You're too much. How much interest, if any, does the UK have in maintaining the British remnants of Hong Kong?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is a lot. Okay. So what does that mean, right? It means a couple of things. It means that the British government is basically stated, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, but I don't think so, that they are on the verge of just issuing everybody in Hong Kong, or at least everyone who can prove that they, are a Hong Konger, a passport to just come and move to Britain and live there. That's a big deal. There's over 7 million people in Hong Kong. I don't know if 7 million people would want to settle in Britain, but I know that at least 2 million probably would. So the cultural connections between Britain and Hong Kong are very strong. And one of the reasons why they might be strong is that Britain never behaved with the kind of ferocious brutality that it did in other countries that really caused a legacy of hatred and bitterness, like with Ireland. Or with India and Pakistan. The British, Indo-Pakistani relationship is, it's lukewarm. There's a lot of resentment there, justifiably. Definitely. But with Hong Kong, the Hong Kongers that I've spoken to, most of them take a quite rosy approach to the legacy of the British Empire. They'll admit that originally it was exploitive, but they're like, yeah, but it didn't wind up that way. And people could debate that, by the way. But, yeah, so definitely there are very strong links. Very strong links. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Oh, wait, I can't hear you, Heidi. You
The
muted.
old, yes, the old mute. We have somebody, Michelle Bresso was nice enough to put the link for Hong Kong Post in the chat box. Again, friends watching this on APS YouTube channel,
Very cool.
you can go shop through Hong Kong Post, and you should be able to find something there.
Right, right. And keep in mind too that the dollar amounts in Hong Kong are not the American dollar amounts. It's basically, I think, 7 Hong Kong dollars for every dollar, 7 or 8. So yeah, it's less in value, the Hong Kong dollar.
So what's next for Professor Kurtz in terms of the Hong Kong stamp or anything?
Yeah. What's next? What's next is I got to get there. I want to get back. I mean, I want to go back. I don't know when I'm going to be able to go back for 2 reasons. First of all, of course, because of the virus, it's a concern. And second of all, because of China. And I don't know where the relationship between the United States and China is going over the next 2 or 3 years. Now, I'm not saying that America and China are going to like go to war or something, that's like some kind of like, fringe belief. I don't think so. But I think that we depending on how things go with Hong Kong, with Taiwan, with the Chinese economy, it's going to be interesting to see. I would love for me and my son and my wife, Anne, to walk up Nathan Road and to take the Star Ferry across the harbor and to, enjoy a strong cup of coffee, while looking over the ferries. It's a dream. It's a dream. But things between the United States and China right now are not good, and they're getting worse. They're getting worse. Again, I don't think there's going to be a shooting war, but it's not cool. It's not a good time. I would basically say to anybody now who's watching this, I would, with an American passport, I would only absolutely travel to China if I had to. Like if I absolutely had to, I would do it. I wouldn't recommend anybody right now going to China unless they had to. Even after coronavirus. But that's just my personal thing. Yeah.
Well, we have one final question, Professor. I understand that recently a man who was an associate of Mahatma Gandhi said that India was much better off under British rule. Perhaps the people of Hong Kong are experiencing the same realization.
Right. Yeah, that's the whole idea of retrocession, the retrocession movement, right? The idea that Hong Kong needs to reassociate itself with Britain in some way, maybe not like, as a colony, but maybe like in the same way that Bermuda, is associated, where, maybe the Queen would once again reign over the city, but the city would be largely self-governing. So, retrocession is weird. I mean, it's just really weird. It's really strange. And I just really don't know, because when you talk about things like retrocession, you get into the weird thing, like really, so like people are going to start to like die for each other. I mean, that's really ultimately what it comes down to, right? It's not just, these are changes in military relations and whatnot. So I don't think, by the way, I don't necessarily believe in the idea of that the British government was wonderful governors all over the world. They, the British Empire's politics and history is so complex, depending on where you are and when you are at any given time. So I don't necessarily believe that. And if it were true, then Britain itself wouldn't be on the verge of splitting up, which it is. Okay. And you have to remember that too. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that, not England, Britain is, if there's another Scottish referendum, there's a good chance that the Scots could secede from the United Kingdom. A lot of polls show that that's possible. So that certainly is a testimony to the quality of, British government. Yeah. So, but it's easy to go down that path, but it's not an ideal one. It's not.
Always insightful, Daniel, always insightful. We appreciate what you bring to the table here and your unique voice in the philatelic community. Thank you so much for joining
man.
us.
You check it out, man.
Yeah. Put it, just hold on, put it at the kit.
See that? See?
Move it a little bit further towards you. Bring it back. A little back. I don't know how good we're going to get, but that's a great shot right there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really beautiful stamp. It really is. It's really cool. It's really cool to see. Though these are mint condition, these are not canceled. So they to my knowledge, they've never been on a great journey, but they're still cool. They're still cool to look at. And they're probably still legal in Hong Kong. They probably are. You could probably mail them in Hong Kong. They wouldn't be worth much, but because I think in America, stamps printed after 1880 are still legal tender, I think. I don't know. Maybe.
Somebody
knows that.
on the call would definitely know.
Yeah,
that.
somebody on the call would definitely know.
Right.
Yeah.
And no chat coming up just yet, but that's okay. Thanks as always, and I hope that you'll join us in the new year, Daniel. You
no problem.
Fresh perspective and the postal history. You just one can hear your enthusiasm for it. So thanks so much for joining us on Stamp Chat, friends. Everyone who joined us today, I hope that you'll thank Professor Kurtz joining us from New Jersey today in the chat box. Thank you all for joining us live, and to our friends on APS YouTube channel. Thanks. Be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel while you're there, and feel free to keep the conversation rolling, as I mentioned at the top of the show, by using the comment box below. Today's Stamp Chat was brought to you by the APS Membership Department. Becoming an APS member is just a couple of clicks away. Visit stamps.org and apply online. We offer a number of membership options, including digital, youth, and international. So there's something for everyone there. The APS members has members around the world in over 100 countries and serves to support and connect collectors around the globe. Visit stamps.org and become part of a tradition today. For more Stamp Chats, of course, visit our APS YouTube channel where you can like and subscribe it. And you'll find over 80 Stamp Chats. Yes, over 80 Stamp Chats, to include the virtual stamp show that we held in August and the Postal History Symposium. You don't want to miss that. Be sure to share that with your clubs and societies. Remember, together we grow. Until next time, collect and connect. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course on stamps.org, the American Philatelic Society, social since 1886. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you later. Thanks, Daniel.